Welcome back to the channel. My name is Lonnie Chambers. Today I'm talking about how I identify different defensive fronts from an offensive perspective. It's a little bit of a follow-up to my last video where I talked about how I install inside zone rules. I went pretty in depth about even fronts and what the communication is like in running inside zone from both 11 personnel, a little bit of 20 personnel as well. So I won't spend too much time about on even fronts. Just to draw it up really quickly, first I'll talk about an over front, what that means to me. Starting with an over front, it really tells me where the three technique is lining up. So if the three technique is to the right, that's a little bit different in terms of angles and where we want to get to on the next level. So what I mean by that, let's say you have our three technique opposite the back. We have something like this. Like we'll have a Sam or a nickel maybe who's splitting the difference. Even this Will right here, right, could be cheating inside the box a little bit more. But for me, just telling me that this three technique, whether a team game plans to have them to the field, away from the back, to the back if you're in some 20 personnel things, it's really going to help me figure out, which way I want to run outside zone. Do I want to go to the boundary a little bit more? So kind of similar to my next point about an under. So with this under front, essentially just tells me that the three technique is from the offensive perspective opposite the call. Right. So if we're going inside zone to the right, and our backs to the left, and they have a three technique opposite, right? Now we have our nose here. To me, that essentially means that, this linebacker, right, they can be a little bit tighter, maybe a little bit more into the run fit because they know backside we have this gap covered up. So for me as an offensive coordinator, obviously I would like to run to the one technique, just a little bit better angles. Maybe we're going into 20 personnel if we get into more like a pro look. So to me, a pro just means that now we have three true backers in the box, right? So instead of maybe both of these backers being in the 30, or maybe even this Will being in a 40, now you have Mike in maybe like a 10. Will, he's still somewhere in the box. Now we have our Sam, right? He's at least head up on the tackle, truly inside the box. Maybe they go to some one high things where one of these safeties are rolling down. If this one of these backers, if there's a seventh defender that's really giving us problems, that might dictate to us that we need to go to either 11 personnel or 20 personnel to account for that. All right. So if we get, a lot of this where, it's more guys in the box than we can handle, might put a tight end in there. Let's say we go back to an over front where they're kicking the three technique to the strength or to the tight end. It might be a little bit more like this. Right, maybe this end is head up in a 6 on our tight end. Now we have our shade backside in a 1. Will's fitting here, probably a B gap player. We got our Mike in a 10. Now we got a Sam linebacker, probably in a 60, maybe a 60I inside shade of this tight end. All right, so if you go back to my last video about installing inside zone rules, either way, no matter what front we get, it should still fit within our rules. So looking here, right, we got our tight end. He's covered, right? He's got a guy who's head up on him. All right, so let's say our tight end, he's covered, he's head up. Now our tackle in this case, he's going to be the uncovered guy, right? Now we can get our combo, right? Nice double team, or what you would call a tray, whatever you call your combos in your system. We get a tray up to +1, our +1 linebacker, because first we've identified that this is our Mike, right? He's in the middle of the field, in the box, right? Now we can assume man here, he's covered. Technically, our center is uncovered here. Talked about that in our last video, right? He can build or he can get a combo up to our Mike with our backside guard. Now our tackle, he's going to figure out how to capture -1, right? And then we still have our read key on the backside for our quarterback. All right, so pretty simple there for our even front stuff. Now, what I wanted to get into a little bit more in my last video was how I identify odd fronts, especially at the high school level. Sometimes it can get pretty tricky for those guys who aren't familiar with seeing different fronts, especially having to communicate that through the course of a single game. All right, so for me, I'll start with a stack. So any odd front, really, you're thinking that you have an odd number of defensive linemen. Most of the time, there's going to be 3 defensive linemen. In the case of a bear front or some traditional old school 5-2 defenses, you'll have 5 down linemen or 5 true defensive linemen. So here, starting with the stack, like I said, we'll start with a 0 technique. It's usually head up on the center. All right, then you have your other 3 defensive linemen who are playing the tackle. So that means they're either going to be head up in a 4 technique, maybe even a 5, lined up on his outside shoulder. All right, so for this example, I'll put them in 4s. With the stack, it's just like what it sounds, right? These linebackers are going to be stacked behind the down lineman, the defender in front of them. All right, and then in this case, maybe you have a nickel who's to the strength or to the call, maybe a game planning thing as well. All right, so for this one, from an offensive perspective, you kind of need a different set of rules for even fronts versus odd fronts. All right, so I went in depth on the even front rules in my last video. For an odd front, really the way I teach it is for our play side guard and tackle to think of everything in sets of 2s or in combinations. Really you want to capture the most threatening 6 in the box, right? So for this example, this nickel I would consider not in the box, right? So you want to look to first identify your mic again, right? Now that lets you know who you're working to. So in this case, we have this Sam linebacker here. I will consider the +1. We have our Will linebacker. I would consider the -1. So what you want, as opposed to an even front, when your tackle is normally going to be comboing with a tight end or maybe your H-back who's in an offset position, he's going to be comboing with his guard. So ideally in the odd fronts, your guard and tackle are working to what we would call a deuce or whatever you call your combination between guard and tackle. They're going to work that together to +1. All right, so they can both have eyes. Probably take a timer step as a tackle here, maybe get vertical, right? And as a guard, I'm taking my play side step. I'm checking the hip. If this defensive end slants in and becomes a B-gap player, for the most part, he's going to be yours right away while your tackle works up to +1. All right, and vice versa. If this defensive end loops out and becomes a C-gap player, if I'm this guard, I'm probably going to try to check that hip a little bit, give your tackle a little bit of help before I square back up, make sure that I'm square, and then I build to +1. All right. Back here between center and backside guard, probably, not going to take, a huge bucket step or anything. It's still inside zone, right? So he's taking, his zone step, 45. He's going to work vertical, right? He knows he can take a pretty big chunk of this guy because he's got his guard working backside, right? And they're working this to the mic. All right. So the only person whose footwork changes, a little bit more is probably this backside guard. He's probably going to take a good bucket step, open up, trying to get to play side number of this 0. All right. And then again, tackle, similar to an even front. He just got to figure out the best way to get to -1. Again, I could probably make a separate video just about this backside tackle, and this, especially in this stacked look right here. He can take a read key block, right? Determine what technique this defensive end is playing and work opposite to capture his -1. If he plays inside, I'm probably going to work out and capture the outside number of this Will linebacker, right? Just in case this quarterback pulls the ball. If he works outside of you, right, then it's just business as usual. He's going to veer, work to the inside number of this Will linebacker, block for the running back. All right. So let's just say for this example, you get your defensive end working out. He's going to veer up, capture the inside number of his -1 linebacker, right? And now the quarterback still has his read key there. All right, so it's pretty simple. Okay, so for our next front here, I'll talk about an Okie front. All right, so for our Okie, pretty much starts with the defensive lineman in a similar lineup or alignment as the stack defense. You're gonna have a zero technique right over the nose again. Defensive end, depending on how they're coached. Similar deal. They're going to be head up or maybe even outside shoulders of the tackles. Then we'll have two backers, probably in 30s, maybe 20s head up on the guards, depending on what their coach should do and maybe what their limitations are athletically. For a 3-4 or an Okie, I think of having four linebackers. Typically two outside linebackers who can be a little bit versatile in both the run game and then maybe even some coverages and getting into their drops. All right, so let's say for this case, we have a Sam, maybe even a nickel type body here who can be versatile. Another linebacker, who's probably just as athletic, but maybe one of these guys, especially on a high school level, I see a lot where one of these guys is more of a pass rusher, and run stopper, and one of these guys is more of a coverage guy. All right, so it can vary based off the personnel that you have or that you're going against. But for our offensive coordinator, when you're game planning, it's kind of up to you to determine which of these guys is more of a threat for for what you're trying to do that week. All right. So similar to the stack, right? So you'll have you really just want to find the most six dangerous guys that you want to block. All right. So I think to get on the same page with that, again, it starts with identifying your Mike linebacker. Right, if we're going inside zone to the right, back points here, Mike here. Technically, this will be your +1 linebacker, right? Next linebacker over is going to be this Sam. Even if he's splitting the difference, even if he's walked out all the way over number 2, sometimes that can confuse young tackles. But I try to make sure that my guys understand that no matter where this guy is lined up, if he's at depth or if he's walked up on the line of scrimmage, this still remains your +1 linebacker. All right. Then you have your -1, still going to be that will linebacker there. All right. So if we go back to our rules, right, like we just mentioned with the stack defense, nothing really changes except backside. I'll get to that in a second. All right. So now we have the exact same thing, play side, right? The only difference is instead of this +1 linebacker being stacked in this Okie front, like I just said, we might have to be a little bit more diligent with the communication post snap. Because these guys can play some more games with their alignment, especially if he's walked down the line of scrimmage. Maybe he's this defensive end, he's stunting C gap. Maybe he comes back into the box. So make sure these guys have their eyes up and they're alert. All right. Same thing here. We're working an ace play side. Right. This center, he's probably going to have to be pretty quick with this one. Guard. It's definitely doable, right? He's got to take a really good step, trying to work to get his head across the zero. Center, he's going to stab back with his left and work to build to this Mike. With these angles being so aggressive, I think it's allows the running back, even more ability to cut back, right? He can press this outside, even though it's inside zone, right? We don't want to, go too horizontally, right? But just because of the space that's in our B gap at the snap, right, it kind of determines the running back to be able to cut A, B, or backside C. All right, so here again, the difference with this Okie front, though, right, because now you have more guys in the box than you can block or account for, right? So it's kind of up to you as an offensive coordinator to make sure that you're in a personnel that works for you. So for me, this would be a situation where if you're not thinking you can throw the RPOs, or you might not have time to get the ball out to the perimeter, and you want to just run true inside zone, you got to make sure you're in 11 personnel, maybe 20, whatever you determine this guy, if he's an off H-back or an off tight end. Backside again, just like with the pro, right? Because you have 7 defenders in the box, you got to make sure you're taking care of it, with more blockers. All right, so for this Okie front, backside, we're going to have a jack. We got a combination where this backside tackle, right, instead of just building or veering to -1 right away, he can work this. Right now, we got 2 for 2 backside as well. All right. If you really, really would like to, still have a read key on this, right, there's your read key there, because this guy can still give you fits in the run game if he's able to crash and chase, right? So just to keep him honest, when you go to the Noki front, technically that can be your read key out here, right? Because 9 times out of 10, you only have one receiver out here, all right, and they're not gonna need 3 guys for this one receiver backside. So from an offensive perspective, again, right, you can still try to take care of this guy from fitting in the box with whatever access, routes that you carry. If you want to, have him run the go route to keep this safety deep. If you think you can take advantage of some underneath stuff, feel free to do so. All right. And then last thing I'll talk about is the eagle or the bear front. All right. So now for what I would call an eagle, some teams call it like a mint front. I definitely differentiate that from a bear front, and I'll talk about that in a second. So the main thing when you're talking about an eagle, it's about these 2 guys on the edges, right? So previously, for a stack or an Oki, you had guys who were head up or even outside shoulder of the tackle. Right now, you're going to have guys that are playing 4 eyes or maybe even a 3 technique. Right? We still have our nose guard head up on a 0. 3 technique back here. Right? This could be, defensive line, like true defensive tackle bodies, or maybe even a defensive end, someone who's strong enough to still take on double teams. All right, so now we'll have our maybe Mike and Will are playing 30s or 40 eyes. They can be a little bit wider because ideally you have the interior taken care of. All right, and then you'll stab your Sam. Right, he can be splitting the difference or on the line of scrimmage. Then you could have either a nickel or another linebacker type who's also doing a similar thing as an Oki. All right, so for this eagle look, really you just want to make sure that you can identify if one of these linebackers are going to be trying to fit into the run game or rush the passer, or if both of these guys are coming, right? Because an eagle can turn to a bear really quickly. So it's important that you have kids who are able to identify if they have a 5 technique, truly on the outside shoulder and, fitting the run, setting a hard edge here versus someone who has dual responsibilities in the pass game. All right, so if it's a bear, right, I advise to have a bear check in because a lot of things, especially inside zone, don't really translate well to, a bear front. You might want to get more to outside zone, something that can get you to the perimeter, something that can still work within your rules because honestly, outside zone and inside zone, the assignments are the exact same. You're just changing up the aiming points. All right, so for this bear front, obviously you probably have to get into some 21 personnel, some heavy packages to make sure that all your gaps are accounted for. Gap scheme runs you're a lot more limited in as well. But just in terms of each of these 3 fronts, I think it starts with having consistent communication with identifying the mic, making sure that you're on top of it as a play caller, what personnel you have out there to account for the extra defenders. So that's pretty much all I have for this video. Feel free to share your ideas on, other ways to take advantage on certain fronts that you get. Let me know if there's any other topics you think would be a good idea to discuss. But for now, thanks for watching.